Taking a look at all the very latest from around the world, and here at home now, it's the ITV Lunchtime News.
Chelsea's billionaire owner Roman Abramovich is sanctioned. The Foreign Secretary accused him and 7 other oligarchs with links to Putin of having blood on their hands. When Chelsea's sale is put on hold, homes, jets and yachts owned by Mr Abramovich can also be seized.
People in this country can see that people connected to the Putin regime need to be sanctioned, and that's what we're doing.
It's as Russia is accused of genocide after the bombing of a maternity hospital in the besieged city of Mariupol. Ministers say visa requirements for refugees coming to the UK will be eased, but only from next Tuesday. And as more Ukrainian children suffer the consequences of war, some who have found safety in Romania.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Lucrezia Millarini.
Good afternoon. The owner of Chelsea Football Club, Roman Abramovich, has now been sanctioned by the UK. It means all of his assets have been frozen, including billions of pounds worth of homes, private jets and yachts, both here in Britain and around the world. The sale of Chelsea FC, reportedly up for £3 billion, is on hold. Well, Mr Abramovich is among a growing list of sanctioned Russian oligarchs. The Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, said this morning those with links to President Putin had the blood of the Ukrainian people on their hands. We'll have the latest on the war in a moment, but first our political reporter Shihab Khan on the sanctions imposed today.
Super yachts, mansions in London and Chelsea Football Club. They are just part of the luxurious collection that Roman Abramovich, one of the richest men in the world, has acquired over the years. He is alleged to have close ties to Russian leader Vladimir Putin, something he denies. But today, the government has chosen to freeze his assets.
When you look at what is happening in Ukraine and you look at the casual rejection of every norm of civilized behaviour in bombing a maternity hospital, I think people in this country can see that people connected to the Putin regime need to be sanctioned, and that's what we're doing. So what I've always said is that we will continue to ratchet up our sanctions as this goes forward.
Abramovich is one of 7 wealthy Russians, including his former business partner Oleg Deripaska. The government has sanctioned as part of the response to the invasion of Ukraine. The Foreign Secretary today said oligarchs and kleptocrats have no place in our economy or society. With their close links to Putin, they are complicit in his aggression. The blood of the Ukrainian people is on their hands. They should hang their heads in shame. It will have an impact on Chelsea Football Club, which is one of the assets that has been frozen. The government has said it will issue a special licence to allow games to go on, but the club can't sell any further tickets or merchandise.
It's really upsetting. It's an upsetting day for all of us fans. Like I said, we're innocent in all this. We really haven't done anything wrong, and we're sort of feeling the impact of everything that's happening, and it's a very political situation, and that's sort of out of our control, unfortunately.
So what impact do you think these sanctions will actually have on stopping the invasion in Ukraine?
These 7 individuals, they control significant sectors of Russian economy. The idea is to isolate and corner Putin, and also to deprive him of the war machine and economic war chest that he has. Sanctions against oligarchs. It is symbolic, but at the same time, it has consequences, but it wouldn't be the most significant step that the UK has taken so far.
This move will impact Russia and Putin's so-called inner circle over the long term. And the hope is the prospect of that happening makes Russia reconsider its actions in Ukraine. Shihab Khan, ITV News, Westminster.
I'm joined by our sports editor, Steve Scott. Steve, let's just dig into these sanctions a little bit deeper. Specifically, what impact will they have on Chelsea Football Club?
Lucrezia, a significant impact, and the squeeze starts immediately. Let me give you an idea of the sort of things we're talking about. You just heard Shihab reporting about all merchandising can't be sold now. No new ticket sales, although people who have tickets for games will be allowed to use them. But the club is also going to be limited on what it's allowed to spend. For example, on a match day, £500,000 limit on catering, security and stewardship. And then when they're travelling to away games, there's a limit of £20,000 for that, although the government has said it will be slightly flexible when they have to go and play in Europe. The club is allowed to accept money from the Premier League as part of the broadcast deal. That will keep the cash flow going and hopefully give them enough money to pay players and staff. But given Abramovich has loaned the club £1.5 billion since 2003, they're going to have to get used to a whole new way of operating. The biggest unknown, of course, at the moment is the sale of the club. Now, Abramovich saw which way the wind was blowing last week. He announced the club was for sale. There's plenty of interest about it, but it feels at the moment like it is on hold, although my understanding is the government is going to introduce some sort of mechanism whereby it can be sold as long as none of the proceeds obviously benefit Abramovich, and it is likely those proceeds, if and when that happens, will benefit a charity connected to Ukraine.
Yeah. All right, Steve. Thank you. Well, in Ukraine, the city of Mariupol has come under further shelling a day after a Russian airstrike on a maternity unit killed 3 people, including a child. Ukraine's president accused Russia of a genocide, calling the attack beyond atrocity. Yasmin Bolbai has the latest.
It's meant to be a place where life begins. The reverberations of the attack on this women and children's hospital in Mariupol are still being felt. Mothers and babies and sick children were being cared for here, so it was horribly inevitable that a child should be among the dead.
So we had 17 injured and affected people. It's mostly pregnant women and doctors, and 3 killed people. One of them is a child girl. So it's awful to tell this and to know about it.
Condemnation has poured in. The UK has called it a war crime. President Zelensky has another word for it.
Доказ того, що відбувається геноцид українців.
Genocide.
Європейців.
Europeans, he says, you won't be able to say that you didn't see what happened to Ukrainians in Mariupol. You saw, you know.
З маріупольцями. Ви бачили, ви знаєте.
Yesterday's atrocity doesn't seem to have stopped the bombardments. The authorities say this was the city this morning. The situation inside the besieged city is dire. Desperate people say food and water are running out. We have no drinking water, this woman says. It's about -12 degrees in our flats. We have no gas. We are freezing. We have no food. Men loot here. Trees are being cut down. Bodies are being buried in the yards of the apartment blocks. It's so scary. We can't live like this. But the signs are that she will have to continue to live like this. Both sides met for talks in Turkey earlier. Ukraine's foreign minister asked for a humanitarian corridor to get people out of Mariupol. He says Russia refused. The World Health Organization says 18 medical facilities have been attacked since Russia began its invasion 2 weeks ago. Yesterday, bombs fell on 2 other hospitals in the city of Zhytomyr, to the west of the capital. If people aren't safe in a hospital, where are they safe? Yasmin Bottleby, ITV News.
Let's go live to Kyiv now and to our Europe editor, James Nates, who's there for us. James, any positives we can take from the talks happening today?
No, I don't think there are. Beyond the fact that they happened and that for the 2 sides to talk to each other must be a good thing, but absolutely nothing came of them. The Russian terms for ending this fighting remain unchanged since before the war. And there's clearly, the way the fighting has gone, no way that Ukraine is going to accept those at this stage. I mean, basically wars only end when one side or the other believes that they've got everything they can through military force, and I just don't think we're anywhere near that stage. The Russian attitude to what happened yesterday again was callous in the extreme. Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, talked about the pathetic complaints being made about the attack on the hospital. He said that the women and children had been moved out of that hospital, and that nationalist troops, as he called them, were using it as a barracks. Well, obviously we're not there, we can't completely verify that, but there was a camera on the scene immediately after that bomb went off, and we saw that the people coming out of that hospital were women and children and a woman in labour and doctors. There was no sign of injured troops or troops having been stationed there at all. And as for the humanitarian corridors, well, they keep promising them. They're still not happening. There's no more sign of them happening today, which does drive you to the conclusion that it's a deliberate policy to keep the civilians there.
All right, James in Kyiv, thank you. Joined now by Tomasz Bentel from Médecins Sans Frontières, who is in Lviv. Tomasz, thank you for talking to us. We just heard from James there, we saw in our reporter's report as well, this latest atrocity, the bombing of a maternity hospital in Mariupol. It's been condemned as another war crime and genocide.
Yes, we do have a team in Mariupol. The situation in the city is critical. Our staff tells us there is no available drinking water. Explosions are still ravaging the city. Residential areas are reportedly targeted, with medical structures also being under attack. Elderly people struggle to find food, while parents with small children are running out of necessary hygienic supplies for their kids. Last time I spoke with our colleagues, it was yesterday, and they said that what they're seeing on the ground is very much the definition of a humanitarian disaster.
I mean, just looking at the pictures are getting just very difficult to watch, aren't they? But increasingly, it seems that it is civilian targets that are being the target here. These are the new tactics. 3 hospitals in the last 24 hours have been hit.
Yeah, it seems from what our colleagues tell us who are on the ground, it seems that the bombardment and the attacks are very much indiscriminate. Even in the hospitals, we see that the patients are civilians. Sometimes the patients are children. There are women, there are men. There doesn't seem to be one particular group that is targeted. It is affecting everyone.
Tomasz, you're out there, you're with doctors and medical staff. You're trying to treat people who have been wounded, who need help, who just need regular medical assistance, don't they? But with the fact that there is limited water now, power supply, medical supplies, just how much harder is this making your job?
Well, it very much depends on what kind of region of Ukraine you're talking about. When we talk about Mariupol, I mean, it's basically impossible to get anything in, just as it is impossible to get anyone out. The city is completely locked in, and we are trying to make sure that some logistical corridors are reestablished, but it has been very difficult because the humanitarian corridors, they have been promised again and again. And so far, no one has been able to keep that word. Still, the fighting is very much ongoing, and civilians have no way of escaping. That is not the situation in all of Ukraine. I mean, we were able to send humanitarian and medical supplies to Kiev. They were then taken over by the employees of the Ministry of Health, who managed to distribute them to the hospitals in Kiev. So the situation very much differs, and it very much varies on what kind of region of Ukraine we are talking about.
And Tomasz, briefly, what are you in need of the most in terms of medical supplies?
Well, right now, surgical kits and generic medicine, all is needed. All of that mainly because of the kinds of wounds that we are seeing. I mean, they do require surgical interventions. So that is the kind of area that we are trying, that is the kind of gap that we are trying to fill at this moment.
All right, Tomasz Bentel from Médecins Sans Frontières, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And the government finally eased the visa rules for refugees seeking sanctuary here following a brutal backlash, including from its own MPs. From next Tuesday, Ukrainians who have a passport will be able to complete their application online. Well, 22-year-old student Roxolana is in Lille in France after fleeing from Kyiv with her family. She's in a hotel and has wanted to come to the UK. She described the ordeal she's been through.
I think it's impossible to go to UK right now. We can't even sign in because you have to choose your visa. You have to choose if you have family, if you don't have family. If you don't have family, you have to have a sponsor. If you don't have a sponsor, okay, that's your problem.
Let's go to the Houses of Parliament now, where Priti Patel made that announcement earlier, and our Deputy Political Editor, Anushka Astana. Anushka, the government's approach has been called shambolic, hasn't it, when it comes to visas and refugees? Are they starting finally to get a grip on it all?
Yeah, well, they are reacting, and partly they're reacting to stories like the one you've just heard, but they're also reacting to the images that we've all seen. For example, of people boarding coaches in Calais and then travelling over 70 miles to Lille to the nearest visa centre. So because of all of that, because of the frustration, there is going to be a new system in place from Tuesday, under which those with family members here in the UK who are permanently settled will no longer have to go to visa centres anymore. Instead, they'll be able to apply online. That will then go for a security check and they'll be emailed a pass to travel to the UK. That will last 3 years, and while they're here, they will have to go to a visa centre to do the biometrics to make that a digital pass, if you like. Now, sources in the Home Office say that they have been guided by the security services at every step of the way, and they are now saying that this is okay. And they also say some of the slowness was because we didn't have a visa system in most of the EU, but there has been a frustration, as if the Home Office has had to be dragged kicking and screaming at each step of the way. For example, at the beginning it was only immediate family members, then it was extended family members. At the start it was for 12 months only, now it's for 3 years. Then there were the visa centres, and now it's online. And I think it was that frustration that Yvette Cooper, the Shadow Home Secretary, tried to get across in the House of Commons earlier.
Why does it always take being hauled into the House of Commons to make basic changes to help vulnerable people who are fleeing from the Ukraine?
She has asked why we are not making these changes immediately. They are subject to digital verification. It is important that we're flexible in our response, and we have been.
So look, Labour and charities that I speak to have welcomed these changes, but there are still some worries. For example, they say that this still doesn't apply to people who are temporary here in the UK, and it doesn't apply to people who don't have family links. Also, it doesn't change anything for Afghans and Syrians who want to come to the UK.
Anushka, thank you. Still to come, the most vulnerable victims of war, the children who've been given shelter in Romania. One other story of failures by Network Rail and the company Carillion caused the deadly Stonehaven rail crash. An investigation has found the train hit a landslide in August 2020 after heavy rain in an area where a drainage system had been incorrectly installed. 3 people died. Our Scotland reporter, Louise Scott, is in Aberdeenshire. Louise, a damning report today.
It is. The Rail Accident Investigation Branch found the crash was caused by a drainage system unable to cope with heavy rainfall. These errors were made in its construction in around 2011-2012 by the firm Carillion. Now, that drainage had been installed to manage the risk of intense rainfall, which was seen that August morning, but it was installed incorrectly. An extra structure was added, which altered the water flow, and on that morning caused gravel and stony material to be pushed onto the tracks. Now, Carillion went into liquidation in 2018 and they hadn't informed Network Rail of this additional structure, but the rail firm was also criticised for failing to carry out inspections that may have identified the issues, as well as not addressing weaknesses when it came to heavy rainfall. Now, 3 people were killed when the ScotRail train was forced off the tracks due to this gravel. 6 others were injured, and today Network Rail apologised.
We're very sorry for what's happened. This report makes very difficult reading. The installation of the train by Carillion back in 2012 wasn't right. We didn't check it properly. And the operational management of the extreme weather wasn't done properly. So we're sorry for what's happened. We recognise it's a really difficult day for the families of those who died and were injured.
of families of those that died have released statements today to say they are thanking authorities for taking time over this painstaking investigation, and they hope that the future this doesn't happen again and that the railways will be safer for generations to come.
All right, Louise, thank you. The owner of Japanese fashion brand Uniqlo has temporarily closed its stores in Russia. The retail giant said it was facing operational challenges due to the worsening situation in Ukraine. It's a U-turn move for the brand's owners, Fast Retailing, which earlier this week said it would keep stores open. And John Lewis has restored its annual bonus and unveiled a pay rise for its workforce, but has warned of price hikes because of what it calls significant cost pressures. Staff at the retail giant, which also owns Waitrose, will share a £46 million bonus pot. Well, finally, through the devastation and heartache of the war in Ukraine, some sense of hope and normality is being instilled in children who have found themselves separated from their parents. Some are now being looked after hundreds of miles from their homes at orphanages across Romania, with teachers offering care and compassion to those who would otherwise have nowhere else to go. James Dunham has their stories.
Puzzles, colouring, childhood simplicities for Ukraine's youngest victims experiencing the harsh complexities of war, the building blocks of their tiny lives ripped apart. I have no mother and father. They died. I lived in several places and I know it's important to listen to my teachers and behave myself, says Sasha. He is 9. Our trip took all morning and all night. I don't know how to explain it, says Stas. The 11-year-old fled Odessa in southern Ukraine last week with big sister Angelina. Their mother can't leave the country because she is unable to walk. She says she is thinking of her family. That sense of responsibility is being shown by the Romanian government. 27 children are being looked after at this orphanage north of Bucharest, among 66 in the county. This is a tragic moment for all of us. It's a huge challenge for the system and our community, but we have the resources to care for these children. These refugees were brought here by their Ukrainian teachers who left their own lives back home. We believe in a better future and that the war will be over. I believe Ukraine will stay united as a nation. Sasha is dreaming too. I want to fly into space and take my teacher with me. Tragically, war is not a world away for this generation. Here, at least, they are being given comfort and hope. James Dunham, ITV News.
That's it. Mary is here with the evening news at 6:30. The news where you are follows the weather, but from everyone on the lunchtime team, bye-bye.